Good morning. Welcome to ASM Biothreats. My name is Anthony Griffiths, and together with Wyndham Latham, I'm the co-chair of the program committee for this meeting. I have a couple of bits of housekeeping to mention before we start. Firstly, please no videography or photography in this room or the other rooms. And secondly, you may have heard that there were some changes at the State Department recently, and we lost our keynote speaker, Tom Countryman, at the last minute. We're very grateful to announce that Bob Gary has agreed to give a talk really at the very last minute. So tonight's keynote session will be Bob Gary giving his perspectives on the recent Ebola virus outbreak. With that, I'll hand it over to Jason.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the ASM Biothreats meeting. I want to thank the organizers and the program committee in particular for inviting back this very, very special session, Global Threats, Collaborative Solutions. I came to ASM about 5 years ago, and we integrated this session based on the simple premise that diseases know no borders, that old cliche we all talk about. This meeting is largely focused on the science and a little bit of the policy, but we felt it was very important to recognize that this challenge really goes well beyond the science, and it takes a collaboration not only within the country, but well beyond our borders to meet these emerging pandemic threats. So today we have a very, very special session with folks that are managing the programs out of the United States government to really meet those emerging threats, whether Mother Nature or intentional. They come from a wide variety of backgrounds, and I won't actually go through their CVs. It would eat up too much of the session. But we have Kendra Chittenden from USAID, Lance Brooks from the Defense Department, and Melissa Kadzik from the Centers for Disease Control, all sort of pointed in the same direction. Global health security agenda, cooperative threat reduction, emerging pandemic threats, policies and programs, terms we throw around. We assume it's being done, but these folks are actually program leaders. They're thought leaders. They're not the gray-bearded veterans of biodefense. They're not the squeaky new students that want to do this sort of thing. They're the folks who are actually doing it in real time. And so we thought it'd be nice to hear their perspectives on what's working, some of the challenges they face, and of course, what the future holds. So there's a crystal ball under the table we've all been looking at, because no one really knows what the future holds. But we know these programs are important, and we know that the collaboration that they forge across borders is really essential. So with that, I will start by turning over the microphone to Kendra, who's going to give us her perspective from USAID.
Thank you, and good morning. As Jason mentioned, my name is Kendra Chittenden. I'm a senior infectious disease advisor for USAID. I work in our emerging pandemic threat division. And for anyone who doesn't know, USAID is our U.S. Agency for International Development. So we focus on global partnerships in a variety of areas, including health. Global Health Bureau is actually one of our largest divisions, and within that, the Emerging Pandemic Threat Program has been in existence since the H5N1 outbreak. So for many of you in the room, you already know this, but I wanted to start off by highlighting that the drivers for disease emergence are intensifying. And this past millennium, if you look at this chart, this is the population growth and the factors that increase with population booms. Over the last millennium, we've had an enormous population boom, which has resulted in increasing so many of the factors that are drivers for emerging diseases and have been creating these intensified risks, such as expanding agriculture sector, land use has changed, increased crop production, bringing animals and humans closer and closer into proximity and forcing more and more diseases to spill over into the human population, making this a really critical area for global health and global health partnerships. So if we look at the world, and it's been broken out based on these factors of where disease hotspots are for emergence within the 20th century, and we see that population is the pink bar, has a lot to do with it, but also the biodiversity of animals and climate change. You see many of the red areas that are huge hot spot zones for emerging diseases are also along certain climate areas. But really, combating diseases requires global partnerships, and as the slide shows, we all know that with global travel, epidemics turn into global epidemics very quickly. So USAID has a series of partnerships through what we call our Emerging Pandemic Threat Program, and they are along the lines of the high-risk areas that were on the previous map. So if we want to take a look at this slide, talking about the ecology of diseases, USAID focuses very much on multi-sectoral partnerships. I'm just going to go through the slide here, put this up. So this slide really shows what it takes if we want to start being better prepared and think about preventing diseases. On the left, as we call it, of this cycle, the cycle shows that animals, both wildlife and domestic animals, carry zoonotic diseases, and we know that 75% of emerging diseases stem from animals. These can spill over into the human population, and normally our public health systems have been focused on finding diseases in humans and then responding. And if we miss diseases and they are already an outbreak in animals, it starts amplifying. And that risk, as you see, then becomes amplified for human cases, and this is how we end up getting pandemics. So for USAID, our approach toward preventing really is about moving this curve as far as we can past this green area here so that we really understand what we call spillover and looking at understanding the factors characterizing why viruses spill over from certain animals, which we know that some species of animals are more likely to spill over diseases such as bats, non-human primates, and rodents. And if we understand the human behaviors, the factors, and the type of viruses that can spill over, then we can understand how we put in better prevention mechanisms, and we can hopefully avoid or mitigate a large public health crisis. So our Emerging Pandemic Threat Program is based on that principle of really trying to prevent very early on in a multi-sector capacity way. So we have programs that are starting to look at surveillance differently instead of waiting for outbreaks, and we want to strengthen existing capacity both in animal and human health sector. But we also want to focus on creating new models that we're predicting when certain viruses may spill over so that we can better prevent far on the left and prevent that spillover incident from happening to save lives, and in human and animal lives, because animal diseases pose, as many of you know, a huge risk for livelihoods and industry. We also want to target these practices, which requires a lot of not just doing your traditional laboratory surveillance, strengthening and epidemiological response, but also involving people that understand how to change behaviors. Behaviors such as, at live bird markets, these present huge risks for how animals transmit viruses to one another. Working with vendors so they understand what these risks are. Extractive industries, so mining companies know as the land use changes, the risks to humans become more and more. So we also work a lot with sociologists and with behavior science as well. But also to accomplish all of this and to truly build multi-sector partnerships, you have to have policies, and we have to start thinking about the workforce differently. And these are the elements of the programs that I'll talk about. We have 3 main projects within our Emerging Pandemic Threat Program that are operating globally in over 30 countries. One is called Predict. The other is Prepared and Response, and One Health Workforce. And we also have strong partnerships and grants with the FAO and WHO. Predict is really established, and it's led by University of California at Davis with Metabiota and EcoHealth Alliance and the range of partners that you see on the bottom to really help us change that surveillance model to be more predictive. So as you can see, this shows some of the stats. We've been working for 7 years now with the Predict program, and they've set up partnerships in over 20 countries and 32 labs to characterize the risk areas in those countries and between animals and humans. Where are they interfacing the most? Where are viruses likely to spill over? And then to collect samples at those high-risk interface. They have developed low-cost consensus PCR techniques where you can readily screen through over 24 different viral families of high consequence potential. And once they get positives on those, they then can have trained these laboratories to be able to go and look further for certain viruses and viral families so that we can create this big database of what we know or what we don't know is out there in the animal population and start to assess the risk. So as you can see, some of the numbers are tallied over here. We have so far to date have found 815 virus families within these human-animal interfaces in these 20 high-risk countries, and 169 of these are completely unknown. So we're still further characterizing this data. And all of this is available on Health Map. But the other part of creating this ability to have these partnerships in countries to look at spillover events, it really relies on having a strong One Health foundation in countries. And that's our project PNR is implemented by DAI. They support governments to bring together the different sectors into formal committees that we call One Health committees. In some countries, they're called Global Health Security committees. And while it sounds easy in principle, we know even from our work here in the US that it's one thing to collaborate, it's the other thing to really sort of jointly, actively strategize, plan resources, share resources, have joint mandates, do joint laboratory testing, sharing samples, and going out and doing response together databases that link. Those are all things that could be accomplished if you start to establish your government in a more One Health approach. So that's the goal of our preparedness and response program. But one of the hugest issues that we see worldwide, and one of the biggest gaps and challenges we continue to face, is workforce. And so building the One Health workforce is a major challenge. And we are looking at how to fill urgent gaps, particularly on the veterinary sector with our partner FAO. But in the long term, we need to have universities that are training and able to build what we call One Health workforce, a cadre of young people that are coming trained and don't know really there's no boundaries between public health and veterinary science. And so our lead partners from the US are the University of Minnesota and the University of Tufts, and this is the School of Veterinary Medicine and also Public Health and Medicine. They're working together. So far I've created 2 large networks, one in Southeast Asia called the Southeast Asia One Health University Network, and the other one is our IOSHA one, which is in Central and East Africa. These 2 networks are a consortium of the leading universities within these 2 different regions. And it brings together all the deans and the faculties to come up with identifying what are the gaps and challenges to truly training One Health personnel, and then to come up with curriculum and activities and sharing experiences across these networks so that we can start to build this workforce better. And all of the work that we have been doing aligns very nicely with the global health security agenda. So I did want to mention this if people aren't familiar. This is a large international program which is over 50 countries and organizations that are now part of sharing common goals to improve global health security through developing these common action packages, as they're called, along the categories of increasing global ability to prevent, detect, and respond to infectious diseases. So throughout this partnership, many countries have signed on to be official members, and we work together to do all of the types of activities that I described within the previous slides. But this really gives a nice policy forum, and it also is starting to bring more and more donors, such as World Bank and G7, to start to align resources, because we cannot be successful in any one country if every country is not capable of achieving these goals to strengthen their ability to prevent, detect, and respond in their own country. And so one thing I wanted to touch upon, and I would say the very first slide I showed was a picture of an Ebola survivor. And so I think one message that for USAID, we're always talking to governments about, this isn't just as well about global security. Anytime there's an emergency in a country, even in a fast response, you're going to suffer if you can't take care of an outbreak that happens. So that is really a strong principle behind the work that we do. Every country needs to be fully aware for the next outbreak that's coming. But looking forward, again, going further to the left and left and left about how can we better prevent, before there are public health issues in a country. The next step beyond the work that I've talked about in the Emerging Pandemic Threat Program is an initiative called the Global Virome Project. And this is really based around the factors of once you understand spillover and we start to characterize and understand certain species, certain viruses that have potential to cause pandemics, can we start to characterize all of these? Can we use math modeling? And a lot of effort has been put into sort of coming up with exactly how many viruses would we need to fully characterize and sequence before we start to understand, print some elements about what causes spillover, so that we can start to look then at not only setting up prevention mechanisms but in the field, but also starting to think about making better vaccines and countermeasures, truly understanding these viruses and what we can do to think ahead with countermeasures. As we saw with H1N1, in the best of circumstances, which is making influenza vaccine, where there's been systems in place for decades, we still were too slow to come up with vaccines that could have rolled out in a way to really have prevented the spread globally that we saw in H1N1. So the next big step is bringing together all countries to share data and to sequence and to make this available, and to start bringing in private sector to think about the next generation of diagnostics that we would need to do something that's at a large scale, like the Human Genome Project. And so really this is about the legacy of the Global Virome program is about looking at this data-rich science. We do have a lot of data, and we're not harnessing that for really making the type of advances that we could do. But it's also about creating this global surveillance network for emerging diseases, because as we have seen with infectious diseases, with influenza and others in particular, these issues can become very sensitive unless there's agreement about how to share, utilize data, how we distribute the vaccines once they are developed. And so this does take a lot of thinking and planning prior to the emergency. So I just wanted to leave with some websites where you could get more information. These are all of our implementing partners, and they each have websites where you can get more information about the different elements of USAID's Emerging Pandemic Threat Program. As well, there's the Global Health Security Agenda website, and that also highlights success stories and many of the work that we do collectively as a U.S. government agency, and then more information about the Global Virome Project. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Lance Brooks from Defense Threat Reduction Agency. First of all, I'd like to thank Jason for inviting me at 7:30 on a Monday morning for the first opening session after a Super Bowl overtime. So thank you, I think. But I'm actually very pleased to see a large audience out here. I see friends, colleagues, and many partners that we work with. So for a number of you, this information will be very familiar. What I'm going to do is run through the program really quick, just to give you a flavor for why the heck is DoD in this space and why are we doing some of the things we're doing, because we usually get that a lot of places. USAID and CDC makes sense, but for a number of folks, why DoD? So we actually started about 25 years ago. Actually, this was an outcropping of Senator Nunn and Lugar. At the fall of the Soviet Union, we're very concerned about nuclear material and the safety and safeguarding of that. As some of our partner countries were going for independence and the Soviet Union was collapsing, there was a lot of disarray. So thanks to them, their tenacity for looking for partnerships and the funding to get these programs going. Then later on, after there was a focus on nuclear materials, also chem weapons elimination, the Biothreat Reduction Program came into existence to start dismantling and destroying bioweapons programs and helping safeguard and securing biological materials. And from that, as you'll see in our mission statement here, we saw there was a need to help our partner nations with their biosecurity, safety, and biosurveillance infrastructure and systems. And we focused not only on that, but potentially anything that could be a national security threat, a regional security threat, and also a U.S. national security threat. So therefore, you'll see in there that not only are we worried about biothreat agents, potentially anything that become a pandemic to impact the national security posture. Because select agents, the majority of them are zoonotic diseases, we do focus on One Health. We focus on the public health infrastructure as much as we do on the veterinarian infrastructure. So I may not mention it throughout this talk, but One Health is a tenet of everything we're doing. So when I talk security, safety, and biosurveillance, I'm really talking about public health and the veterinary sector. And we actually try to work with those in combination. So we do focus on biosecurity. We do the basic stuff. We put up fences, guards, gates. We help making sure the laboratories are secure. Most of you work in a laboratory. You have these security postures in place. You deal with them every day, and as being a former scientist, I know it's annoying, but once you get used to badging in and out of facility, it's not as bad once it becomes routine. But not only doing the physical aspect of security, we also help countries with their national biosecurity and safety legislation. Just like in the U.S., there was a lot of various security posture throughout the country until we had national legislation. That also enables many organizations and entities to then secure funding to put these things in place. So that's why it's really important to have legislation in place. And I could give you country examples, but I'll get to later. There's going to be a number of folks here at this conference that you can actually talk to personally to see what CBEP does, or ChemBio, Cooperative Biological Engagement Program, I'll refer to as CBEP throughout, because we have a number of partners here actually at the conference. Biosafety, all the way from how to safely collect and handle samples in the field, coming up through the laboratory system, how to have those protocols in place, to making sure that the regional, the district labs, BSL2, safety postures in place, all the way to central reference labs, work as much on the protocols, SOPs, to make sure that everything that's worked with is handled in a safe manner. We do work on enhancing biosurveillance in these systems. Once again, this is both public health and the animal systems. We work all the way, we take a systems approach, so we're not focused on one thing in the country. We really try to go in and assess with the country where the needs are and work all the way, as I said, from field collection all the way to the surveillance system up to the national central reference labs within the countries. So that includes field sampling, field epidemiology training, sample transport. We also ensure that assays, detection are in place that are needed for not only what's endemic, but being sure that labs are prepared for what's emerging. And we do work on emergency operations centers so that once you do have and detect, you can effectively respond, but that's kind of where our mission space stops. We can take all our work up to emergency operations center, but our work stops there because we're primarily a non-proliferation, kind of a prevention program. So that's where my colleagues in CDC are well-versed in doing emergency operations centers, and that's where their forte is. And we also help folks with electronic reporting. All this is geared towards meeting international health regulations and to be able to report any incidents of public health security concern. Research. One reason a lot of us are here and our partners are here, research is a tenet of our program. It really is there to inform the national biosurveillance system. Everything we do is hypothesis driven, and we want it to really work towards informing the public health and the animal sector to be able to make those public health informed decisions. Kendra laid it out greatly. That's one reason I didn't go into background of what the threat space is. And as she said, a lot of the work that USAID is doing, which we coordinate and collaborate with, we follow, and we try to help take it and put it into action in these biosurveillance systems on how do you inform public health. So a lot of you doing research for us, you realize that this is what we really push hard on, is trying to make sure that the research informs the system. To that end, I'll just make a plug for the program. We roughly have 75 participants here from our partner nation countries, and that's about 17 countries represented. There's going to be 2 oral presentations and about 36 posters. So if you want to get a little more flavor for what CBEP does, there's plenty of opportunity in the poster sessions. And if you're curious which ones we're supporting, sponsoring, I have a list with me here, and you can see me afterwards. So we don't have the expertise to do this all. Take home here, it's an interagency effort. We rely heavily on the interagency. Hence, we're plugged in very closely, coordinating with our partners on the global health security agenda, working with our partners out in the global space on doing biosecurity, safety, and biosurveillance. And we leverage heavily, for instance, the CDC to do epidemiologic epi-training, field epi-training, to help us train folks on the maintenance operations of EOCs and how to do proper response. We rely on the national labs to do biorisk management training for us from DOE. And then the number of service labs you see there actually help with our partners to go in and do clinician training, technician training on how to do run appropriate assays and detection in the laboratories, and also do some mentoring. So the take home here is we really rely heavily on a lot of subject matter expertise. So the way to think of our program is we're primarily like a program management office. We manage all this to put it into place, and we leverage expertise wherever we can. And this also includes the private sector and universities and non-government organizations. To that end, since we're working with global partners, we work very closely with the international organizations. We really try to work with WHO, OIE, these type of organizations on putting in the national, international standards, and the lights just went out. It just maybe got more important. And now I can't read my notes, so now I'm really going to wing it, so you guys are in for a treat. But we really work on them with international standards and help put in guidelines and frameworks for making things like the international regulations actually be able to put into action. Let there be light. So here's where the program works. As I said, 17 of these countries are represented here at the conference, and now I get to see everybody. This is fantastic. I'm easily distracted, sorry. So you'll get a chance to meet, and I encourage you to do the posters. You'll see this, and you'll probably see our program highlighted. I could list off the countries, but take an opportunity to talk to our scientists and really see what's going on out there. So decided I'd list some challenges. Now remember, these are for me from a big program perspective. You're not going to get some great, scientific challenges to work on. I got a wonderful science team. We have regional science managers that a number of you know and met that actually run our science program and the research and kind of are the glue that brings everything together in our program. But from my perspective and what I see across the program, what we run into is many partners, many donors around the world. Why is that a challenge? Well, not everybody coordinates. Everybody has, even our 3 departments, agencies, have our own individual mandates. And then after the fact, it's up to us to coordinate, collaborate, and make sure there's a coordinated approach. Now, just imagine how much that is multiplied when you're dealing on an international global scale with a number of donors. Each country, each donor has a different mandate. It really puts a stress on our partners when we all come in with different visions and ideas of how things should be done. So it is a great challenge. Country baselines, everybody starts off differently, so there is no cookie cutter approach. Sometimes leadership thinks, hey, just go in and do this, it's a cookie cutter approach. No, everybody has, their strengths and weaknesses, and you need to take that into account. Many types of assessments. My colleagues out here, especially my partner nation countries, can tell you, WHO, IHR assessments, global health security agenda assessments, you name them. There's like assessment fatigue, and over the years, a number of folks have not seen those put into action. And now is really global health security agenda, and now the WHO is moving this way. It's like, let's start putting all these things into actions. There's enough assessments out there. Let's start moving towards action. I mentioned international standards and guidelines. Go out and do IHR. It's up to you how to figure it out. That works for some, but for a lot, it's like, am I hitting the target? Am I not? Is this the right way to do it? Is there a more effective way to do it? If you don't have international, standards and guidelines, it makes it very difficult. Multi-sectoral coordination, or as we know it in the United States, interagency coordination collaboration. It's so easy to do. I don't even know why I have it as a challenge. No, I'm kidding you. Even in the U.S., we struggle with this, much less our partners in a national and regional level. Why is that so? I mentioned we all have our separate funding stream, we have our separate mandates, but yet we're supposed to go make something like Global Health Security Agenda happen. And why is it important? Well, when there's a major outbreak, as you know, it's not just the public health labs involved. It's security, even for biosecurity, even a non-outbreak situation. It's law enforcement agencies. You got to have public health working with the animal vet sector. Oh, wait a minute, they're in two different agencies. And then if it's a large national scale, maybe even the military involved, foreign affairs. And we don't get together on a regular basis to discuss these things. Governance or regional planning, coordination, and communication. Kendra kind of mentioned this, growth of populations, regional, the issues that are out there. They're not border specific. Most of the issues we face in outbreaks are always cross-border. But yet it's one of the things, even here in the United States, among states, it's one of the things we least practice that much. Some areas and regions are better than others, and we can take best practices. But now on a global scale, sovereign nations' borders and conflict, strife, tensions, economic competition and such, now you just multiply it, that's much more. Governance and appropriations. Most of you working in the labs overseas and trying to address these issues know that without regulations in place, you can't go to your leadership, who can't go to Parliament to ask for money. They'll ask you why you're doing this, because you don't have the authority to do this. Works the same way in the United States government. Until I am an authorized program, I can't, through the president, request a budget. So that's one reason we work so heavily on the governance, on helping put legislation in place. It's the engine that drives this whole thing, unfortunately. Human resources. We all know it, the public sector, the public health sector, animal vet sector especially, usually the lowest paid staff in most governments. Not in all, but in most governments, because there's other emerging needs. We even face that issue in the United States if you've been following the news. There was a lot of emphasis on public health system post 9/11, now that we've gotten further away from that event. Funding for public health labs is starting to tail again. It's a serious issue. And we're starting to see, even in the United States, outbreaks of diseases we typically haven't seen in 20, 30 plus years. So it's always a constant issue. Transition, what we provide and what others provide, it always has to be with a lens that, this lab, these folks, they don't need a MiSeq, they don't need to do whole genome sequencing. I know as scientists and technical folks, we get really excited because whole genome sequencing is going to solve all the problems in the world. As most of you know, that's not the case. And so, it's a very costly enterprise. That's what's really needed to inform a public health decision, is to stem the tide of an outbreak. Do you really need that level? We do need a level of understanding of the ecology of the disease itself. So there are some aspects you need that, but can you do that through regional, sharing and collaboration, coordination, and focus on what a partner nation really needs? As I mentioned, everybody starts at a different baseline. Let's kind of raise the tide and make sure we're all at a certain baseline to be able to really respond to whether it be terrorist or a natural outbreak. So. Success. What are some of the things I think would lead to success? None of these are easy one-off project solutions. Show me a single project that has solved this big, massive problem in the bio world for addressing biothreats and prevention and response, detect and response. It's not out there. So what does that mean? There's a lot of things you have to put in place. And hopefully, from what you see our program doing, taking a systems approach of building a whole national biosurveillance infrastructure, there's a lot of moving parts and pieces. There's also a lot that folks within these countries, from a disease burden standpoint, still don't know all the answers. The Ebola outbreak highlighted that. I think we learned that we knew a lot less about Ebola than we thought we did, and now that it's in that type of environment, that type of population, And for the first time, we're really going to learn what the long-term effects are of being exposed to Ebola for the survivors. So yes, there's still a lot to be done. It takes a long-term, coordinated, consistent approach. It's hard because we do have administration changes, not only in the United States, obviously, but across the world. And we keep, in this arena, keep following along this way with the funding stream. But it's relying upon folks like us at this level, as I always say, well, it is being streamed, but I'll be careful what I say. But for the political folks in the government, you know, they are going to focus on the political crisis du jour or the priority du jour. That's why they got elected. But for us at the working level, we're the ones that have to maintain the consistency, advocate, and work on this long-term consistent approach. We can build that into the way we set up our programs and manage them and advocate for budget and resources and how we work together and collaborate. Unfortunately, we collaborate better when we're in a low-resource environment than we do when we're in a resource-rich environment. It's always the case. I've seen it. 15 years in D.C. It never changes, but I think right now maybe some good opportunity to collaborate. But we'll see what the new administration brings us. So top-down versus bottom-up approach. Too many times we're focused on just working at the district, at the lab level, but like I said, it really requires governance, legislation. Health systems versus disease stovepipe. That's no reflection on the folks out in the audience. Some of you work very specifically, but that's where the funding is, unfortunately, and that's where the focus is. It's on outbreak du jour, disease du jour. There's a lot of acute diseases and illnesses that definitely need to be addressed, but can we address them in a way that we address them taking a look at the whole system and taking a systems approach? Because some of the infrastructure and the expertise to deal with one disease stovepipe really can be applied across the spectrum and to prepare folks for emerging outbreaks and diseases. It's a little tougher to do. It takes a little more coordination and thinking and working together, but this is usually an issue that we find. And then fostering collaborations and connections. Oops. Sorry. Wrong button. So my science team loves it. I just love this slide. Thanks to Dr. Gene Fair from Los Alamos, Marty Stokes for putting this together. This, I don't expect you to follow all the arrows and stuff, but the take home here is in 2014, the team put together a bat surveillance workshop intended to drive towards outcomes and goals and foster further coordination, collaboration. So I'd say when you come together in a meeting like this, if it's driven towards coming together to looking for common problems and cause and committing to having outcomes coming out of that, the return on investment is awesome. What came out of that is a number of laboratories across the world. We have labs from the Caucasus, from Georgia, working with labs in Southeast Asia. We have labs in the Middle East working with labs in the Caucasus and in Southeast Asia. These type of connections we wouldn't naturally have seen, on their own. And it's not because we funded a number of these activities as a follow-on, but they found a natural common problem, decided they would divide and conquer the problem because we do have limited resources, as all you know in this space. There's so much to do in the bio world that there are limited resources. So it doesn't benefit any of us if we're all working on the same problem and trying to do the same exact experiments in our laboratories. And so that was a premise of this. So I wanted to just say that I would encourage you, while you're here, you have a wide, diverse audience, a global audience, to go around the posters and look for those opportunities to interact and coordinate and collaborate. And the return on investment to this conference and you being here will be so much greater. And in the future, Jason may be able to put a slide together like this as an outcome, which is, I know, his hope that this would foster. We take advantage and we work closely, as I said, with CDC, USAID, but the PREDICT program, working with the Global Virome Project, and a number of you work on that project. You also work with us. And we take that and we try to fill the gaps of some of the things that can't be addressed because, once again, even though Dennis Carroll has unlimited budget, no, wait a minute, it's not unlimited, but yeah, it's limited, that we try to leverage that. And from that, the team, and I'll plug it, they'll be happy, is putting together a global bat alliance, which is to complement the Global Virome Project to fill the gaps of the things that that program can address. And that's an example of how this coordination, collaboration can work and be successful. So I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Melissa Kadzik, and I'm from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, Georgia. Specifically, I work for the Bacterial Special Pathogens Branch in the National Center for Emerging Zoonotic and Infectious Diseases. So what we do is we work to build surveillance, laboratory diagnostic, and outbreak response capacity, focusing on 4 major pathogens, which are anthrax, brucellosis, leptospirosis, and melioidosis. Even though we focus on 4 pathogens, the basic epidemiology and microbiology skills that we build will help address other diseases as well and build skills that people can use in multi-sectoral platforms. So many of the recent global outbreaks, such as MERS and Ebola, have had a zoonotic origin, meaning that the disease has spread from animals to humans. Zoonotic work can be difficult. It requires intersectoral collaboration, and there can be inherent differences between the way human, animal, and environmental sectors prioritize and respond to these zoonotic pathogens. For instance, what one sector considers a priority may not be a priority for another sector. When you bring 2 agencies together and talk about prioritizing zoonotic diseases, often the diseases listed as a priority for the animal sector do not fully match with those listed as priorities for the human sector. I'll take brucellosis as an example. Even in endemic areas, the human sector does not see this as a priority disease because they don't understand the burden of brucellosis among the human population. Brucellosis presents as a fever with muscle and joint pains and is rarely diagnosed in humans because it's not tested for. However, in endemic areas, brucellosis is seen as a huge priority for the animal sector because it can have an impact on the livestock sector and individual household incomes. In animals, brucellosis reduces milk production. It can cause abortion in fetuses or stillbirths. Another impediment to frequently faced to address global health threats is constant government turnover or changes in government regimes, which both of my colleagues have mentioned. This means when working on zoonotic diseases, you may have to start from the beginning again to educate the new leaders on why zoonotic diseases are important and why the programs you are trying to work collaboratively to initiate are necessary. This can cause delays in one sector, meaning that the animal sector may have increased surveillance and laboratory diagnostic capacity that the human sector does not have for that specific disease, or vice versa. And this can cause problems during outbreak response when one sector is much stronger than another sector. CDC advocates for the collaboration on zoonotic diseases through the creation of One Health units, the same as what we saw with USAID. We have seen in the past that often one agency will work to create their own One Health unit. For instance, ministries of health will try and hire vets rather than engaging the Ministry of Agriculture or the Ministry of Livestock and Fisheries, and vice versa. Those ministries will try and hire doctors rather than engaging the Ministry of Health. This can create a siloed and less effective response to zoonotic diseases. Therefore, CDC advocates for equal representation from different government ministries and agencies, including human, animal, and environmental sectors. We also advocate for the rotation of chairs of these committees and the physical location of the committees, so that each of the agencies represented feel ownership and leadership in the One Health unit. One Health units often lead to better coordination and collaboration between sectors, especially on priority diseases or during outbreak response. They encourage sharing of surveillance and laboratory data, which can help us address priority zoonotic diseases. With the advent of the international health regulations and global health security agenda, we have come to a better understanding of the burden of zoonotic diseases around the world. For instance, one animal case of anthrax can cause disease in a huge number of people because the animal has been slaughtered, skinned, and the meat shared with the neighboring communities. And often, we don't even know about the sick cattle because the farmer slaughters the cattle to try and recuperate some of their investment rather than informing the veterinary officers of the sick cattle. We only learn about the anthrax outbreak once people have been sick. And that's why the intersectoral collaboration is so important, because it is once the people get sick that the animal sector is notified by the human sector. In India and Bangladesh, the Bacterial Special Pathogens Branch has been assisting the government to increase testing for leptospirosis, which originally we didn't think was a problem in this area. We have since learned with increased testing that the burden is actually much higher than anticipated, up to 11% in some hospitals in Bangladesh. Understanding this increased burden has helped us address the acute febrile illness surveillance platforms that are in place in India and Bangladesh and encourage adding leptospirosis testing. And this has helped identify the cause of some acute febrile illnesses that years ago remained undiagnosed. It will also help lead to additional prevention and control measures to hopefully decrease the burden of leptospirosis in the future. CDC is also currently working with the Ethiopian Public Health Institute and Ethiopian Ministry of Livestock and Fisheries to determine the burden of brucellosis in human and animals. Understanding the burden in both populations will help the Ethiopian government determine the best prevention and control methods, which can range from vaccinating animals to conducting community education campaigns regarding transmission routes and appropriate prevention methods, some as simple as boiling milk and not drinking raw milk. The better understanding of the burden of zoonotic diseases and interest from international partners in increasing their capacity to prevent, detect, and respond to zoonotic diseases has led to an increase in requests from international partners for technical assistance to build capacity to respond to these zoonotic diseases. Over the last 5 years, the Bacterial Special Pathogens Branch has seen an increase in laboratory-confirmed cases of anthrax in India due to increased training and laboratory capacity, which results in faster outbreak response and a decrease in the number of cases in humans and animals. Additionally, we have helped trained Indian scientists to confirm anthrax outbreaks with non-molecular methods. This addresses many biosafety and biosecurity concerns, since labs in many parts of the world are not adequately built to culture these pathogens. This also allows laboratories at the regional level who are closer to the outbreak areas to confirm an outbreak much faster rather than waiting for the sample to be transported to the national level for confirmation and hoping that this sample is still viable when it reaches that level. We have also assisted Bangladesh to increase surveillance activities in districts that are endemic for anthrax. We have increased knowledge among livestock owners to improve notification and decrease the response time for outbreaks. We have also done a lot of training for sample collection and storage so that when the samples reach the laboratories, as I mentioned before, they are viable, and we can confirm anthrax, or if it's not anthrax, hopefully confirm what pathogen is causing the current outbreak so that appropriate prevention and control techniques can be put into place. Over the course of the next 12 months, we will begin engaging with Ethiopia and Cameroon to conduct some of the same activities on anthrax and enhance their prevention and control programs. One of the questions we often get is, why do we care? Why do we care what's happening in India? Why do we care what's happening in Bangladesh? Well, improved zoonotic disease programs around the world may have a benefit to the US. First off, the best way to understand a disease and the most effective treatment options and risk factors for contracting the disease are to study the disease in endemic areas where we have more cases and can better understand the impact of different interventions. Also, quick detection and response can control outbreaks before they have the chance to reach the US border. In terms of pathogens like anthrax and melioidosis, which potentially have a bioterrorism component, understanding the natural geographic scope of the disease, as well as the specific species or genotypes found in the different environments, will help us build our knowledge of the global distribution of the bacteria and may help us identify the origin of the bioterrorist attack. It will also help us offer assistance to host countries to improve biosecurity and biosafety at labs and during outbreak response to decrease the possibility of an accidental outbreak in a laboratory. Finally, improved zoonotic disease programs could help to promote economic and political stability around the world, which may in turn benefit the US and the US economy. Thank you.
So we have saved a few minutes to take questions from the audience. There are 2 microphones set up, so please make your way to the microphones and ask our panelists some questions. While you're doing that, I have a couple of my own, which is my pleasure to take the microphone first. So picking up, Melissa, on your final point on how you measure your impact. You know, one of the challenges with nonproliferation is that you're preventing something from occurring, and therefore monitoring and evaluation of your impact is often proving a negative. I had the honor of meeting Senator Lugar a few times in his office, and he had a giant scorecard behind his desk, and it was the number of missiles that they destroyed or the number of things that they had torn down. But today it's a different ballgame. So maybe for the group, how do you measure success, and how do you articulate specifically to any new administration the value of your programs? Lance, why don't you start?
All right. Easy question to start with. Thank you, Jason. Supposed to throw a softball out there to get the panel going.
No,
but.
there's
All
not
right.
enough time for that.
So it is a tough question. We were evaluated for the longest time on the number of labs secured. Well, we can go on indefinitely. It would have been job security. I think for us now, it is actually the transition of the biosecurity, safety, kind of culture around the world. We have some prime examples of our partners from where they started and where they're at, and they're actually taking and leading these efforts on their own. A prime example, I'll just use my partners from Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Ukraine, and Kazakhstan right now, on their own, and we're helping them support of started their own regional disease surveillance working group to talk about cross-border issues. You know, about 20 years ago, and my colleagues are out here know that this was never happening. You were focused on internally in the border of issues, but they do have issues across borders, and they're taking this on their own with minimal investment. And so we're confident that if something were to happen in that region, they're now poised, that they have the communication chains to address it themselves with very minimal impact. Now juxtapose that against what happened in West Africa, and we have the complete opposite. I mean, granted, 20, 25 years of civil war, decrepit health systems, no talking to each other countries. Even to this day, post-Ebola, we start seeing some of the natural tensions coming back. No cross-border coordination. We're not really confident that, obviously there's a lot of international presence there that may stem the tide, but if everybody were to leave tomorrow, we wouldn't be confident that they would be able to handle it, and we would all possibly be back there again. So I think that those are kind of in the terms that we have to speak to this, and it is a little more abstract. It's like being, for those, a health and safety officer in a facility. All the principal investigators hate your guts because all you want to do is shut them down from doing research. And when there's never an incident in the lab, why are you even there bothering them? But the moment there's an incident in the lab, who's the first to get blamed? The health and safety officer. So I like to use a little lab anecdote there.
That's great.
Thanks. I agree with everything that Lance said, and I would just add to that the international health regulations and for OIE, the veterinary services, the pathway to veterinary service proficiency, in veterinary services, as well as these are the principles that drive the global health security agenda, and it makes everyone look at not just one factor of biosecurity or laboratory, but the system. And I think particularly learning lessons from Ebola, if we don't have systems in place, and those systems can't just be a laboratory, it has to be the ability to detect and prevent and respond, because we cannot control any disease, natural or intentional, if you don't even know that it's happening in your country. And then once you do know, having that ability to rapidly respond. So I would say the Global Health Security Agenda has really set now, working really closely with IHR, principles under a joint external evaluation that give us more tangible measurements of, I think, what a system looks like that could prevent and detect and respond. And along that line, there's a lot of indicators, and it's challenging for countries to be, and every country's in a different place, but at least there are tangible markers of showing that the program's working by building capacity, other than, we didn't prevent a pandemic, because that is hard to prove. But now we can look and say countries are capable of reporting even like brucellosis within a certain time period. And I think those are very important because they're tangible results.
Thank you.
I'll just add one more thing, and that's when you build a lot of this capacity for surveillance and laboratory diagnostics, you often see a spike in the burden or prevalence of different diseases, and people start to question, is this really working? Well, often the answer is yes. The disease isn't spreading more, it was always there. People just weren't able to diagnose it. They didn't have the training, they didn't have the necessary reagents or equipment. So really, you have to start to build that capacity, and when you do, you often see a spike in what we thought we knew of the burden and prevalence, which makes people question the programs. The other thing I'll add then is that often the interventions take a few years to really start to impact the burden. So you need to wait in order to see the outcome of these interventions and start to see the decline in these diseases.
That's great. All right, we have less than a minute left if anyone has a final question. If not, I will thank our panelists. It was fascinating work. I'm sure the scientific community was eager to learn how they can better engage on these topics, so please feel free to engage our speakers in the coffee breaks. And also be sure and go to the poster sessions. Of course, now that I'm finished, someone's at the microphone. We'll give you the last word, please.
This is actually from our Facebook Live. This session is being broadcast on our Facebook page, and this is from Robbie. He's asking if there's going to be an implication of gene editing in outbreaks of the future.
Facebook Live question, the impact of gene editing on the future. Lance, you want to take that? Or maybe Marty. We should call Marty to the stage. Don't call the science person up. Okay.
Actually, there's a lot of energy around that, looking at emerging technologies in the bio community. As you guys really know out there, we're right now in an exponential uptick on the pace of invention, evolution in bio. Unfortunately, the risk assessment and the policy always lags way behind. So we're all taking a look at this. I think we're all realizing there's potential there, but to what degree and such, because the technology is so new and advancing so quickly, we're having a hard time kind of keeping up with the risk assessment portion of that. So yes, we're all actively staying abreast of that and trying to figure that into our calculus. What that exactly is right now, we don't know, so to be honest. And there's a number of groups, I know within DoD, there's a National Defense University has taken on a huge effort to take a look at this and to see what the implications are and the risk associated. As I know, there were National Security Council level Interagency Policy Coordinating Committee is taking a look at this along with the Office of Science and Technology Policy. So within the federal government, there's a lot of effort right now trying to stay ahead of that curve and not get too far behind the risk assessment and the policy implications before all of this technology really matures. So that's the best answer I can give at the time.
I think that's a great answer, and we know that today we've been focused primarily on the resource-constrained and resource-limited countries and all of the challenges, the low-hanging fruit challenges that you're addressing through your programs. That said, the other end of the spectrum presents an entirely new set of challenges, and I'll make a plug not only for this meeting this year, where we do discuss some of these new nuanced challenges and policy concerns, but next year building out an even deeper track around some of the controversial policies we imagine will evolve this year. So with that note, I will wrap up the session and thank our speakers once again, and thank you all for attending. Thank you.